Let's talk about data types in JavaScript. We're going to create a new file here and you'll call it data types. So I'll just call it data underscore types dot js. Data types, even the term mentions, is the different sort of aspects of data or forms of data that you have, right? For example, a number is not the same as a series of characters, right? So five is not the same as a name of a person, for example, a name like myself, Bonaventure. As you can see, these are different forms of data that you're dealing with. So that is the best I can put on what a data type is. In JavaScript, we have about 8 data types. There are many of these data types, and they're usually classified to as primitive data types and non-primitive data types. Primitive data types are what you're going to look at mainly here, but non-primitive data types are what you're going to look at later on. So those are sort of non-primitive data types are collections of information in forms of like key and value pairs, but we're going to look at that in a later video. For now, we're going to talk about primitive data types. And primitive data types, these are the normal data types that we're usually used to using. So here we're talking about numbers, we're talking about strings, we're talking about Boolean values and the likes. To get us started with these primitive data types, we're going to start with numbers. So declaration, you already understand how you declare a variable. You have uselet, then you can you can now have the name of the variable. Note that whenever you're using a name of a variable, I'd like to encourage you to try and use variable names that are descriptive enough of the kind of data that you're trying to represent, which is why what you were using earlier, when you're using x and k and the likes, that is not the best way to write variables, rather variable names, but it was good for demonstration purposes. When you're declaring a variable, make sure that you give it a name that is descriptive of the data type. For example, num, of course, refers to a number. So you can say num 10, right? So here 10 is a number. Number is one of the data types that we talk about here. So I'll just have the number as one of the data types that we use. Apart from number, now when you're talking about number, just to reiterate on this, you can also use a number that has decimal point value. So I can say num1 here, and num1 could be 20.6. This is still a number. So any form of a number that has a data type known as number. Apart from number, there is what we refer to as string. So I'll just use letter as well. And then string, you can use anything. So for example, a name of a person is a string. This is a series of characters that has been put together. So if someone's name is Bonaventure, like that, that becomes a string. So here I'll call this a string. You can have any as long as anything that you are writing is enclosed in speech marks, that is a string. You can have, for example, you can have the age of a person. I'll just have let. Then you can have the age of a person. Then the age of a person is 45, but 45, as you know, is a number at this point. But if you enclose 45 inside of speech marks, then it automatically becomes a string, right? So that is string. The other data type is what we refer to as a Boolean. So a Boolean is the literal Boolean that we know from English, which is something that refers to either true or false. For example, I can declare a variable and call this variable like is let's say is rich, right? Let's use that as a variable name. So if you say is rich, that is, you're basically asking if someone is rich, right? The answer could be either true or false. That is what we refer to as a Boolean. So I can say is rich is true. This becomes, let me just add a semicolon here. This is a Boolean. This is a Boolean value. The same would happen if you say something like let, then you say is let. Then you say, let's say the answer is false here. Then you have false. This is still a Boolean. So you have it as a Boolean right there. So Boolean data types have only two outputs. Could be either true or it could be false. Apart from Boolean, There is also a data type that we refer to as undefined. We've already seen what undefined looks like. So if you declare a variable, and I'll just use a funny name, like let's say the name of the variable is nothing, and you leave it empty like that without initializing it with a value, then this has a data type of undefined. And whenever you try to run the code and everything, that is what you're going to get. Apart from undefined, we also have a data type that is known as null. So you'll say let, then you say something like empty. I'll actually just use this as the variable name. Then the value that is assigned to empty is called null. Null is a data type. So I'll just have it as a comment here. I'll also just call it null as the name of as the data type of this. Apart from this, there's also a number of the data type that you can use. For example, we have a symbol data type. What a symbol data type looks like is you will say let, then you declare a variable here. So let's say I just call it SYB as the name, just to signify, let me use SYM as a short for symbol. So SYM is our variable. Then you just say symbol, then you pass in the symbol. So if I say foo, like that, and what I'm going to do here is allow me to just comment this out so it doesn't bring an error. And I'm going to console.log the sim like that. And if we run our code, node datatypes.jsmn, you see it prints out the symbol that we gave it. Symbol here is foo. So this is what we refer to as, these are the data type that this refers to is a data type that is known as symbol. Apart from symbol, there's also a data type that is known as big int, right? So big int is like, just as the term mentions as well, it is let me just write it here. So big int refers to a big integer. You can say declare a variable, and I'll just call it, let's say, big number, something like that. And the number that you are writing is just some really big number, again, like literally a really big number. Then you have something like an n at the end there. So this is a massive number. What we refer to is this as a variable name. We refer to this as a big. I'm going to just use big. It should be big here. So we refer to this as a big integer, big int, like that. Now, as I've mentioned this, you're probably wondering, how do I know all of this? From practice, you'll be able to understand which data type refers to what. The major data types that you're going to interact with most of the time are number, string as well, boolean, undefined, of course, if you don't define something, and null. These are the major data types you're going to interact with. Symbol and big int, you'll interact with this one, but in very rare cases. But the ones that I've mentioned are the common data types. But whenever you're not sure of our data types, whenever you're not sure what a specific data type is, there's a way that you can be able to basically find out what that data type is. And what you do is, I'm going to just have this within the console.log. You use what you refer to as a type of. So this type of method is what you use. So you can say type of, then specify the variable name that you want to confirm what that is. So for example, let's use this big number. We don't know what that data type is. So if we say type of, it's going to print out the type or the data type, what that data type is. So if I run this here, okay, I'm going to get, as you can see here, big int, right? This is, let me actually just turn this to lowercase. You can see that big int is the data type of this. You can also do the same for example, you have nothing there. So you can also try and check what data type nothing is. You run this, you see it gives you undefined. You can do the same for SYM as well. You do that, you run your code, you see it gives you symbol as the data type. Same thing happens to the rest. So let's say we try is rich or is late. When you run that, you see it gives you here boolean as the data type. I'm also going to try, for example, age. Let's use age because that is what might seem a bit confusing. You run that, you see it tells you that age is a string because as much as it's a number, it's enclosed in speech marks. The same happens with the first ones there, for example, like num. So if you do num, you run the code, you see it tells you number is the data type. So that is simply how you know what the specific primitive data types that you're trying to use. If you're not so sure what the data type is, you simply just check it like that. When you're talking about data types, there's also one really important aspect to understand about these data types. And that aspect is what is known as dynamic typing and type coercion. That is why it is important for us to understand the specific types that you're dealing with. So what that means is that you can be able to reassign something with a different data type, right? So just stay with me here. I'm going to declare a new variable here, and I'm going to declare this variable. Just call it maybe data, and I'll give it a value like 100, but 100 a string, so in place like that. If you try and just check the data type of this quickly, as we've already seen before, type of data. If we do that and run our code, let me just clear this. If we run our code, you see it tells us that this is a string, which by now we already know that this is a string, right? Now, how do we do this sort of type coercion and dynamic data typing here, or dynamic typing here as well? The first way for us to start is to convert. So basically, you can be able to convert this 100 from a string into an integer. And how you do that, it's pretty direct on how you do it. I'm going to just declare a variable called data, or rather reinitialize in this case, not redeclare, because reassign, that is, we have data already there. And I'm going to use number. Remember, number is a data type. Then I enclose this data inside of this. If I do this, it automatically converts this string into a number data type. Just to confirm to you, I'm going to do console.log. Then we just check the type. So I'll just say type of data, like that. So you'll see the first one, it will tell us that this is a string, then the second one will come in as a number. You run that, you see the first one is a string, second is a number, because we've already done the type conversion. What we've done here is type conversion. Note that there's a bit of a difference there as well. So what I'm going to do here, let's try to, you can actually even just do the normal calculations that you want. For example, you can add a number like 60. Then if you run this, you still get the same data type. If you also just try to console.log data generally, should give you an answer like 160. You can see here you're getting 160 as your output, right? But if you try to do the same with we had earlier, for example, just say data plus 60. If you do this, and let's clear this and run it again, note that now at this point you're not doing type conversion, which is what you did earlier. You run the code, you get 100 and then 60 in front of it. This is basically, it's adding a string and an integer at the same time, right? So this is it's basically adding them next to each other, which again, as you can see, this is not the right. If you're thinking of just the normal math sort of operations you do, this will not be the right way for you to do it. But now you have to be really cautious of when you're trying to do these kinds of operations in your code, because you can be able to lose equality, where what basically how you lose that is a time when there's type coercion. I mentioned that concept of type coercion. So allow me to just, I'm going to leave this like that. Then we already checked the type of this, so just do it one more time. I just type it here as type of data. And then the reason I'm doing this, just I want to add a comment and just tell you that this is type conversion. Then apart from type conversion, there is type coercion. So just to demonstrate type coercion for you, I'm going to do console.log, and then I'm going to try and do certain comparisons. So when you're trying to compare two values, whether they are equal, we use a double equal sign. We're going to look at most of what this means and a number of this sort of comparisons later on. But for now, let's do this for us to understand the aspect of type coercion. So I'll have a number like, let's say I'll have a number like 90, right? Then I use a double equal sign. This means that we are trying to compare equality. Note that a single equal sign is an assignment operator, but when you have two of them together, that becomes an equality operator. So you're trying to compare that the value on the left is equivalent to the value on the right. So in this case, we do 90, then we try to compare whether 90 is equivalent to something like, let's say, an empty string, right? Or instead of an empty string, let's pass in, we've already, we've already done some type conversion there. So to do this, I'm going to, let's see. Okay, allow me to just comment out this too. Then 90 with data. Okay, let's, because data is already declared, I'm going to just pass in data as the variable name there. If we're trying to just compare if these two are equal, right? So we expect the result from this to be true or false. That is what we usually expect whenever you do that. You see here, we get false. We get false because 90, of course, is not equivalent to 100, right? But let me change this to 100, right? Note the difference between these two is that this 100 that you have is of type number, but data is of type string, and you can already see that here. Data is of type string. So the value is still the same. The value is still 100 between the two, but the data type is different, right? So if we run this code, you see that we get true as the result. When you get true as the result here, this of course has to raise some eyebrows as well, because as much as the values are the same, the data types are still not the same, right? So it's not expected that these two values sort of match or something like that. So it's like you're trying to mix water and some oil, right? They're not supposed to mix, but in this case they're mixing. And that is what we're referring to as type coercion. What that means is that one of these values has been forced to look like the other value. In this case, your 100 here has been forced to match with this other value in terms of, it has been forced to match with this in terms of the data type. So that is type coercion. It's being coerced to change its type from the current type to the other type. So I do hope that this is important. Now, the fact that we are aware of a phenomenon like this in JavaScript, then JavaScript has a way of avoiding such a phenomenon where you see that there's a risk of this happening because this is not supposed to happen. Like again, water is not supposed to mix with oil, right? So what you do is you add an extra equal sign. So what this means now is that this is a strict equality, because you're strictly comparing that, making sure that whatever value is on the right is equivalent with the value on the right, both in terms of the value size itself and the data type. When you have double equal sign, it only looks at the value, it does not look at the data type. So you have them like that. Now, if we run this, we should be able to get a false, because these values are different in terms of the data type. As much as the value itself is 100, but the data type is different. One is a string, another one is a number. So that is very, very important. That's why I mentioned that you have to be really, really cautious when you're trying to do an operation that involves something like this. It again, as you practice further with this, you should be able to fully understand what it means. But for now, just keep this in mind and just keep it in your notes as one of the most important things to note somewhere there. So now that we've understood data types, we understand how to declare variables as well and how variables sort of behave. I'm going to give you some, like an exercise that you can carry out. So what I want you to do is, I'm going to just, let's see. I'm going to, do I just type it in here? What I want you to do is, let's say, yeah, I'm going to just write it here for you. So let's say we have a variable. I'll just have a comment first that says, this is just an exercise. what I want to do is, so we have two variables, right? So let's say we have a variable called a, and the value is 1. The value is 1. Then you can be able to sort of declare the values at the same time like this. So you can have a as this, then you have another variable b, then you give it a value like 2, right? You do it like this. Then again, this is, you can be able to do it in separate lines, but you can still do it in a single line like this. Now what I want you to do is I want you to swap this sort of two variables without having to have a third variable, right? So I'll just have as a comment here, I'll just say swap this two variables without a third variable. Swap them without a that variable. When you swap them, anytime you try to do console.log, let's say console.log, you should be able to say console.log a and b. If you do it like this, it should, at the moment it's going to print out these two, like 1 and 2. Let me just show you this quickly, just to so that I can fully understand what the challenge here is. You can see it gives us 1 and 2 as the outputs when you console.log them like this. But what I want you to do is, as an exercise, of course, what you should be able to swap the two variables. Then when you swap them, they should print. I'll just say here they should print 2 and 1 instead of 1 and 2. As you can see here, it's 1 and 2. Now I want you to swap them, right? Now, note that this is not a trick question. I want you to just figure out how to do that, how to basically swap the two values so that you can get the best result as you can. And please don't go and manually change this to be 2 and then manually change this to be 1, then it becomes 2 1. No. And you just think of it and then figure out, how do you do this specific swapping. It's a pretty direct question, but it's important you just understand how how this happens. Then we're going to just look at a number of other things later on. We're going to look at arithmetic operations in JavaScript and many other things. But at this point, we're going to pause this on here. I hope you've been able to learn a thing or two, and I'll see you on the next one.